Stephanie Taylor Coombs. I'm the Adult Services Manager at MacArthur Library. And this evening we have Joe, our technology expert, in the background. So if anybody has any difficulties getting on, getting online or getting into the program, just let us know. Give us a call at the library and we can walk you through that in the back end to make sure that everybody has access to it. We will be recording this evening. So if anybody is uncomfortable with recording, make sure you leave your camera off. We ask that you stay muted during the talk so that we have a few minutes to really visit with Jason. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Jason Paige Smith, who is an amazing photographer and has worked with all these amazing places. I was looking them up: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Car and Driver, Guardian, you name it, just all over the place. And I think his photographs are amazing if you haven't seen the book. So this book is just amazing. It's The Oldest State, and I'm just going to turn things over to Jason so he can show us his photos.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and I love talking about all these stories because they think that they're, they're really worth sharing, and I know that there are so many more stories out there to tell, and I'm hoping I get the chance to continue doing this and reaching out to more people and getting to know more people around the state. This book, it didn't start out as a book. It was it started out simply as a project for me on the side. It was a personal project. I just kept going out, and every time I'd have an assignment with someone who was older, I just really enjoyed their company. I always enjoyed listening to their stories and learning more about them. I had, great relationship with grandparents growing up, and it just was always something that I enjoyed. And then to find out that I've been in Maine now for, I think about 15 or 16 years now. And when I moved here, I didn't really know that it was demographically, I didn't know that it was the oldest state. And so that was just another sort of interesting element to the story for me. And so I started doing these photos just kind of on the side as a personal project. And the more I did them, the more I realized there were some really, really important stories out there that weren't being told. And the people who are out in the state doing all these incredible things at these advanced ages, they're usually very humble people who have just been kind of going about their business and doing this for years, and they don't really think as much of it as somebody else might. And so I thought it was really important to get out there and start sharing these stories. And so I'm just going to go through a quick rundown of some of the images here for you. If you have any questions about any of the images, as far as where they were shot, how they were done, how I got in touch with some of these people, I'm happy to answer all those questions. That was, for me, that was one of the more interesting parts of the project, was getting to know different people, and then through those people I would find other people, and it just sort of became this really interesting sort of organic process where I would get to know somebody who would then say, oh, you should really talk to this other person, or have you talked to anybody in this part of the state? And so as I moved around, it was really interesting just to see how everybody was connected here. It really is just about 1 or 2 degrees of separation in Maine. So so I'll just move along here. Let's see if I can figure out how to advance my screen. Not sure why it's not advancing here, so I apologize. All right, here we go. So this is just a quick little collage of some of the images that are in the book and some that you'll see tonight. And it really is an interesting collection of people, of faces, of jobs, careers, hobbies, passions, just different things people really enjoy doing. So the first person here I've talked about, I'll let you guys just kind of read through this a little bit. His name was Ed Hendrickson. I met him. He's living in an adult living facility here in Brewer, and this is the amount of information that I put in this paragraph is by any standard is pretty incredible. And I think that I was just kind of barely touching the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure he had many, many more stories to tell. Really, really interesting guy, really, really energetic at his age. Really great positive energy, a lot of fun to talk to, a lot of fun to work with, and just a really, really great guy overall. And so had just this incredible story to tell from when he was back in the service, the things that he did, the things that the things that happened, and the way things were taken care of back in the day. Just thinking, I have my brother-in-law actually flies jets, and so for me to listen to the stories that he's told and then listen to the stories that Ed told was pretty interesting. So I'm just gonna move on here to the pictures of him. And so he was not only a pilot, but he was an avid skier. And I wasn't able to photograph him at Sugarloaf, obviously. So we ended up it wasn't winter when I photographed him. So he was a pretty good sport. We ended up doing a photo indoors and then going outdoors and getting a photo. He had a jacket with a patch on it. I don't know if you guys can see, but it said, and he got this patch that said he was part of the 90 plus ski club. And then when he turned 95, they gave him another +5 patch to add to that so that he could get his age right when he was skiing. So really avid downhill skier and just a really interesting guy. And you can see, if you look under his shirt there, you can see his shirt, the little shirt he has underneath is a tie-dyed shirt, which he wears a lot. So he's kind of known for wearing a lot of tie-dyed shirts, and just really interesting guy, really, really fun to work with. Another really interesting person, Fred Cookson. He is out of Dover Foxcroft, and he's been a farmer and a teacher for many, many years. Owns his own plot of land, and it's just sort of an interesting path that he's taken. I'll let you kind of scan through what I have written here for him, but he kind of worked his way through. He used the land that was given to him to harvest pulp wood to pay for his tuition, which he was using to earn his science degree from the University of Maine. He went on to earn a degree in plant pathology, and he was in the Peace Corps for a while and worked in West Africa. He was a recruiter for the Peace Corps. He's still actively working. Interesting, photographing him. I don't know if anybody's ever been on a farm and tried to keep a farmer's attention for very, very long on a farm. He was a great sport, but everywhere we went, I could tell that he just wanted to stop doing what we were doing so that he could get back to his farm and the things that he was seeing, all the different things that needed to be taken care of, and we were burning daylight. So he wanted to keep working and keep doing what he needed to do on the farm that day. And so I tried to make sure I was getting things done as quickly as we could. And just a great sport, really great guy to work with as well. And so this is a picture of him in his farm. It was, kind of an interesting place to shoot. I've shot in lots of different places, and this one was a lot of pigeons hung out in here, a lot of birds, and so there was a lot of bird droppings around to work with, and he didn't seem to care one bit about where they were and what he was leaning against, so it's good. And he had done a lot of work on his farm with, his wood obviously was a big part of it. And one of the things that we worked with him was just this area where he did a lot of where he cut a lot of his wood and did everything and prepped everything for the winter. And the sawdust there in that area, if you can look by his feet there, was just really, really thick. You could tell he had done a lot of work in just that one specific area. So just a really interesting guy, really hardworking guy. George Dunn, this was another person I met through other people, and just a really neat guy. He actually knew his son, and his grandson played hockey with my son. So it's kind of this interesting way to get to know people. And so he's been flying for a long time. And if you ever get a chance to go out to the area where his family's camps and where they live, it's really interesting. It's kind of a mix between Maine camps and an airport, because they do have a big hangar there, and they do have a lot of planes that are flying in and out. So it is a really interesting place to be, and it's really common for people they know to be flying overhead and tipping their wings as they do that. And then a lot of people in their family are also pilots. And I ended up I teach at Husson. I taught a student this semester, and she knew George as well. And I think George may have even helped teach her how to fly when she was growing up out there. So just a really kind of an interesting guy. Knows a lot of people in the state, and certainly knows a lot about flying. And so this was a portrait of George. I had mentioned that I wanted to photograph him with his plane, and so he just flew it over to our location and asked me where I wanted the plane set up. So it was kind of funny. It was nice to have somebody who could just put the plane where I wanted it and get the shots. So, and the weather cooperated for us that day as well. So it was really nice. This is Ann Bradford. And so she was another person. I can't remember exactly how I learned about her, but really fascinating lady. She lives out on MDI, and each year every single summer, probably getting ready to start now if she hasn't already, she will hike to the top of each peak in Acadia. And so there's 28 different peaks, and so she'll hike to the top of every one of them during the course of each summer. And she's been doing that. She was 82 when I photographed her. She'd been doing that since she was 75. So she has a really, really deep love and passion for not just the outdoors, but MDI and Acadia specifically. And so I like to hike a lot myself. And so she was a really fun person to talk to and to meet. And she actually gave me some great spots to go hike that I didn't know about. And I think I might have tipped her off on a couple of places that she wasn't aware of, but she seemed to know pretty much all of them. So maybe she was just being nice and acting like I was teaching her something that day. So this is Anne here. So I photographed her in front of the bubbles in Acadia. Just seemed like the right spot, sort of an iconic location in Acadia that a lot of people would recognize, and two of the peaks that she's certainly hiked to the top of several times. And so it was a good spot to photograph her, and she had a lot of great stories to tell. It was really fun to talk to her. This is Eugene Walsh, another veteran. Just a really, really interesting story with him. I photographed him when he was 102. I ended up photographing him at his home. Tried to set up shoots with him a couple times, and they kept getting postponed because of blizzards that year. It was just a kind of a rough year to get there. And so we had a great time once we finally connected, and I was able to get down there. And one of the things that was really intriguing about him was some of his stories, and the things that he would. What was really fun with him was when I went to his home and I met with him, he had already kind of pulled out a lot of different things from his past to show me, which was really cool. A lot of really interesting newspaper clippings and old photos and things from his time in the service. And it was just a really intriguing conversation. He had a lot of really great stories, and he really lit up as he was telling them. It was fun to watch him sort of reconnect with stories and times in his life that he might not have really talked about a lot in a while. And so it was a lot of fun to listen to him. One of the things that was really interesting about him was with his story here. So they brought back he said they brought back a group of about 50 people, but when they arrived in San Diego, there wasn't any transportation to be found just because so many ships had come in. All the transportation was taken up by everybody else who had come into the town, into the area at the same time. And so one of his buddies, I guess, had gone into a jewelry store and was having a conversation there. And that person who worked in the jewelry store knew someone who was in charge of the food service for the Santa Fe Railway. And that person then knew somebody who was in charge of the Santa Fe Chief, which was a passenger train that ran from California to Chicago. And so they were then given their own car on the train for all the passengers that they had with them. And so he said it was just an incredible thing. He said they not only did they add an extra car for everybody on the train, but then they also fed everybody because of the connection to the food service. So just really kind of an interesting story there. And this is Eugene. And funny thing about Eugene, when I showed up to photograph him, he was in his pajamas, and I asked him if he wanted to put on anything else for the photo, and he said, "Nope, I'm good." And so I was happy to photograph him in his pajamas, and I think he looks great. This is Jillian Rose. She's from my town here in Orono, and she's 88 or was 88 when I photographed her. She is an incredibly active woman for her age. She logs, she says, about 1,000 miles on her bike, or more than 1,000 miles on her bike. She had logged about 1,000 miles so far at that point when I had photographed her in that summer. And in the colder months of the year, she stays really busy cross-country skiing. And so, and bikes kind of run in their family. Her son, Jim Rose, owns Rose Bikes in Maine. And so he keeps most of Orono rolling through the trails on bikes that they get from him. So just sort of a great family and a lot of active bike riding for sure. And so this is Jillian. I photographed her at her home with one of her bikes, and I'll still see her out riding every once in a while. So it's a lot of fun to see her riding around town. This is Andy Gove. So unfortunately he's passed away, but he was the guy who started this whole project with me. I knew his grandson, who's a drummer, and I was telling him about the project, and he said, "Oh, you've got to talk to my grandfather." And he said he's kind of this iconic lobsterman from Stonington. And so I went out and I talked to Andy and I photographed him, and so this is where the project started. And he got his first license when he was I can't remember how old he was. He was less than 10 years old, I believe. And so he got his license in 1937. He'd been working in the same harbor since he was young and had this incredible knowledge of that harbor and the surrounding area. And there were many occasions where the Coast Guard was looking for people who had been lost at sea, and they would call Andy, and he was able to assist in a lot of search and rescue operations. In a couple cases, he was I'm kind of trying to remember exactly what the situation, but there were people who were stranded, and he was able to track them down and save them. And I'm pretty sure he would have said he saved their lives in that situation. So that was great. So this is Andy here, and that's his home, and you can see right behind him there. And this dock is right out on the water. If you ever see any photos of Stonington or paintings of Stonington or anything like that, their house is always right there, sort of front and center in the front. It's just sort of this iconic home that's right there on the water, and it's been there forever. And so he's a real legend in that area. It's just another photo of him here with his traps. This is Donna Loring. So she is from Bradley, Maine. She's an author. she's a tribal elder. She was also, she went to a political science degree. She went to the University of Maine. She an incredible career. She was I think she was the first police chief of the Penobscot Nation. She was the first female graduate of the academy to become the police chief. She was also the first female director of security at Bowdoin College. She was in the military. She served in Vietnam. She was just an incredibly generous woman with her time. She was great to talk to, had a lot of great stories, had a lot of great resources, knows a lot of people throughout the state. And so she was able to then kind of refer me on to other people who I might be able to talk to. She works with the governor as well, and is an advisor on tribal affairs. So she's just a really well-known person throughout the state when it comes to things like that. And she is a great person. And I've run into her at a few different events over the years. Since then, it's always nice to catch up and to talk to her. This is Donna at her home. And this is Steve Edmondson. He's from Topsom, Maine. And so he actually reached out to me when he heard about this project, and he thought, something in law enforcement would be a good thing. And so I ended up getting in touch with him, and we ended up photographing him. He has been working in law enforcement for more than 40 years, but he has a really strong family tie to the state. And so he has, I'm trying to remember exactly, oh yeah, here at the bottom. So it says so he's had ties back to the state. He's been here since he was 8, but his ancestral roots date back more than 300 years to the mid-coast area of Maine. So just kind of an interesting guy as well. And he, certainly knows the state and certainly knows that area of the state really well. And so this is Steve. And so if you've ever been to Topsom, there's sort of an iconic old bridge that leads into the area there. And so I photographed him both on this bridge here, and then also ended up photographing him beneath the bridge as well here. So just kind of showing the area that he works, and he does a lot of work in that specific area. So yeah, an interesting guy for sure. Has a lot of stories to tell. This is Bob Lombardo, and so he lives in Orono as well. I actually see him a lot. He's well known for walking, or you'll see him a lot of times wearing a kilt. He very rarely is in a car. He's almost always on a bike. He spends a lot of time outdoors all year long. In the winter, he is always out. He skates on lakes, and so he kind of chases the ice around the state. So wherever the ice is best on whatever lake has the best ice is where he gets up in the morning and drives so he can skate. And when it's not frozen over, then he's spending a lot of time on trails. And he actually has, he doesn't make his own bows, but he makes his own arrows, and he does a lot of archery and practices out in the woods. And he does what he calls stumping, where he goes out and finds trees that have been cut down and practices his archery skills on the stumps of the trees. And so he's an interesting guy, and I definitely thought he would make a good candidate for the project. So this is Bob on the left here with his bow and arrow and his kilt. And then I photographed him again in the winter on the lake here. And so another guy who, sitting still is not really something he does well. He's also a carpenter by trade, so he's a really active guy. And when we went out to photograph him, we were standing out in the middle of the frozen lake with my lights and everything set up on the ice. And he had a buddy with him who was also skating that day. And so I had him standing still and getting his photo taken, but his buddy just kept skating by and buzzing the chute and giving him a hard time for getting his photo taken. So another person, as soon as I turned him loose and said the shoot was over, he was gone. He was miles away from me before I had all my gear off the lake that day. So this is Beth Hutchings. and she owns Hutchings Greenhouse in Edmondson, Maine, and she is somebody I've gotten to know really well since the shoot. I go back and talk to her every year. I talk to her a couple times throughout the year, either through Facebook or other little communications that we have. We go back and buy flowers from her every year now and visit with her, and she's been great. And she came over here from Ireland. When she grew up, she used to hang out at the docks that were the same docks where the Titanic was built. She met her husband through the Royal Navy. He was deployed there, and so they, it was kind of this long distance relationship that came to be. And then I guess Leroy was from this area of Maine, so she moved back here with him and kind of made a life here. And so she moved over here from Ireland. They have what's amazing to me with Beth is her husband unfortunately is no longer with us, but she still runs 9 different greenhouses, and they're not small greenhouses. They're actually really big greenhouses. And throughout the winter, they're all heated with wood stoves. And so she'll get up at really, really early hours in the morning to make sure that all the wood stoves are still going and that they all have wood, and that the greenhouses are warm enough to maintain what she needs to do through the colder months, so that she's ready when the real season starts for her as far as sales go in her greenhouse. And so she's moving and burning wood all winter long. She said she burns through 24 cords of wood in 11 different wood stoves that they have. And she's just a lot of fun to talk to. And when she's not doing that, she is knitting or making wool sweaters that she sells, and scarves and hats. And so she does that kind of as her, I don't know how she finds time to do anything else, honestly, but that's what she does. And so she has a great little business doing that as well. And my whole family now we all have wool sweaters from Beth that we bought. So it's been great. This is Beth here with some of her greenhouses behind her, and just beautiful, beautiful flowers and plants, and everything that we get from her greenhouse is always, they always really do well as far as growing and living a long time. They're just well taken care of. So this is Johnny Mack. I wanted to photograph somebody who'd been on the river for a long time, and I have a friend who's a river guide, and I said, I'm looking for somebody, and he said, you got to photograph Johnny Mack. He said he's the guy. And so I got in touch with Johnny, and I had a great time talking to Johnny Mack. He's been here for a long time. It's just, at the time I was talking to him, it was his 34th consecutive season as a river guide. River guide is not an easy job, very physically demanding job. And to do that for 34 consecutive seasons is pretty amazing at any age. And had a great time talking to him, a lot of conversation. Turns out we'd actually been to a few of the same concerts over the years in different parts of the country. So that was kind of fun to figure out. So just a really nice guy, and enjoyed it. And haven't been down the river with him yet, but I plan on doing that one of these days soon. And so this is Johnny here, and I photographed him up at the Forks. And so this is a Crusher Pond, and that paddle he's had, I can't remember how many years he said he'd had that paddle, but it's definitely been down the river a few times. And I think pretty much anybody who works up there on a regular basis or lives up there would recognize that paddle. So this is Frank Perham. He was another person who just kind of referred to me. I never would have thought to look for somebody in Maine who had done a lot of mining work, but he was a 3rd generation miner, lived in West Paris. He's been doing this for a really long time. And what was really interesting about Frank was not only did he have this incredible career in mining and minerals, but he also had kind of a display or sort of a small museum of them in his own home. And so when we went there, I was able to see his own private museum in his home that he has set up, and that he actually has a lot of students come in from local schools on field trips, and he loves to talk to them and tell them about the different minerals and different things that he has on display. And one of my sons was actually really interested in minerals at the time, and still is. And so I brought him with me as my assistant that day. And I think I want to say he was probably about 9 or 10 at the time, maybe 11. And so he helped me set up the lights and move things around. But as I was doing all that, he and Frank were walking around, and they were looking at all the different minerals on display and having a great conversation about all the different things that he had done and found over the years. And so we did this great shoot, and we had this this great experience. And then when I got home, I had an email from Frank asking me for my mailing address. And so I got his mailing, he gave him my mailing address. And then a few days later, he sent just a beautiful piece of quartz with a little handwritten note to my son. And so it was a really, really sweet gesture. It was really nice to connect with him. And I know it's something that my son and I will remember for a long time. And so that was really great. So this is Frank here. And so this is actually one of the old things. He used to use this to set off explosives and everything for mines, and kind of a really old helmet that he's had around for a long time. And just, it's really interesting for me to see things from that historical perspective. There's always a lot of learning that goes along with what I do. And I really enjoy that aspect of this job and this project, not just getting to know these different people and then hear their stories and tell their stories and share them with other people, but also to just kind of learn about things from different perspectives, different times in history. So it's really kind of fun. And this is Robin Emery. She's actually pretty well known around the state as well. She's been running races for a really long time, and she said that she's run enough miles or logged enough miles to circumnavigate the globe 1.5 times. And so she's obviously put in some miles. She's pushed through a lot of physical adversity as well, running in colder conditions. She's had things happen to her where she she said she had a frozen eyeball one time, where now she's always wears ski goggles when she runs in colder weather. She also kind of fought through a lot of adversity when it came to societal norms. When she started running, there wasn't really a place for women to run in races. There weren't, it's hard for us to think of now, but back then there wasn't a women's section of a race when they started races. And she said that she would run and she would do well, but didn't really get the recognition that she deserved. But her house is now filled with just trophies and medals and T-shirts and ribbons, and it's just this really cool kind of. It's just a really great thing to see. It's just really cool to see how many races she's participated in over the years and how many different things she's done. And it's really great that she was able to participate in this project. So I photographed her here in her old garage, and this is, it looks like a lot of medals, but I am telling you, that was nothing compared to what she had in her house. She's been in so many different races over the years, and so it was really, really great to hear the different stories that she had to tell, and really enjoyed talking to her as well. This is Herb Crosby. He was a mechanical engineering professor at UMaine, and so he did a lot of teaching over his career. And but over his career, what he also did was he kind of became an expert on what's called the Lombard steam log hauler. And so these just aren't really used anymore. But when these were developed, they were kind of developed as a way to move big heavy trees that had been cut down out of the forests and out of the woods. And so they're built with the same technology that was then later used for building tanks and things like that. And so these were steam powered, so they had to run sort of along rivers so that they can continue to pull water from the rivers for the steam. And so it was just a really kind of an interesting thing. And so these weren't really used anymore at all. And he was working with students, and they restored one. Actually, they've restored a couple of them now. And so over the years with his students, he's restored, I can't remember how many different students. He said more than 200 volunteers have helped in the restoration over the course of 30 years. And so, they would get to a point where they would need a part, or they would need a piece of the machinery, and that just wasn't being produced anymore. So they would have to actually create those pieces of the machinery themselves in order to fit the machine, and then make it compatible, make it work. And so they actually have these up and running. They do run them once or twice a year to keep them going. And they're really pretty incredible pieces of machinery to be in the presence of in person. They're really, it's kind of a cross between a tank and a train. And it's really pretty interesting to see. And so really, really cool. There can't be too many of them left in the world, if not just a few here in Maine. So, and it was also a Maine invention. So really pretty interesting. And so this is one with one of the older ones. And you can't really see the rest of this one, but that little seat there that you see, that you sit there, and that's how you steer. So you're actually steering things from the front. And so you're just kind of turning the wheels with the wheel there, and making your way through and pulling the logs. And what you see under his feet there is a hose that was used to kind of help move the water along. And this is another shot of what you see there, and just an incredibly knowledgeable person when it comes to this stuff. You can talk to him about really any one aspect or even one small component of one of these machines, and he can tell you all about it. And it's really pretty phenomenal. Really, really interesting to see. This is Everard Hall. He lives in Millbridge. He's been digging graves by hand for more than 50 years. And he said he had buried more than 2,400 souls during his work as a grave digger, and that included many family members and friends. So he takes a lot of pride in his work, and he said he felt like it was a calling, like it was something he was destined to do. And this, I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to bury anything or dig anything or plant anything in Maine, but I can, it's not an easy thing to do. There are a lot of rocks. There are a lot of things that get in your way. It's not an easy thing to do, not easy work at all. And he's been doing it for a really long time. And so I have a lot of respect for that kind of work. And he was a really passionate guy and really interesting to talk to as well. And so this is Everard. I photographed him in a graveyard. He actually had a small grave to dig that day. So he was kind of on the clock. We were there for the photo shoot, but then also he had some work to do while we were there. So just a really interesting guy. And it was great talking to him. And so this is just a quick quote from Jean Watts, and I have a photograph of her husband Harvey here following this. But she said, when I was young, I thought old people just looked old, but now I think young people look unfinished. And I always thought that was just a great perspective and a great way of looking at things. And she's a really, really neat person to talk to as well. And her husband here, Harvey, has this just an incredible miniature train set in his basement. And so it's been something, he's done this for a really long time and has just a really interesting perspective on this stuff. And if you start walking around and looking at everything in there, there's a lot of inside jokes and a lot of things named after family members and things that he was explaining to me. The other thing that's interesting about the way he set up his train set, when I went there, I was anticipating it being set up kind of low to the ground. and he had everything set up and built on platforms that were up higher, sort of at eye level. If you look, he's standing that his head is almost touching the ceiling of his basement there. And he said he did that because he remembered when he was a kid, when he was younger, he saw all the trains at that same level when he was younger, because he was shorter, and it was just the way he saw the world back then. And so that's how he built his train set when he got older. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to do. And so yeah, so that's the last slideshow, the last slide in my project, in my slideshow here. But I'm happy to talk to you guys and answer any questions you might have about any of the photos or any of the process that goes along with setting anything up. Let me know.
That was excellent, really inspiring.
Thank you.
It is. So you and I have talked a little bit before, but can you tell us about the project that's coming up?
Yeah, so we have a project that we are just started it last week. It's been in the process now for a little while, trying to get the planning and sort of behind the scenes stuff going. So we've started, I partnered with the University of Maine's Center on Aging. And so we're working on a new book that's called Tenacity. And it's going to be very similar to the Old Estate project, but it's going to be kind of on a bigger level. It's just going to be a little bit more in depth, and it'll have more photos and more stories, and it'll cover things from sort of a national and international level all the way down to local and individual perspectives. And so I'm really, really excited about it. I think it's going to be really great. So can't wait to get going.
Have you put your photos in an album or a book?
The Old Estate book is, that there is a book available for the Old Estate. It is, let's see, I think it came out a year or two ago. Like I said, it started out as a personal project, and then the more I did it, the more people gave me feedback, and then the more interest that I saw in it. People kept asking me if I was going to make it a book, and so then I had to sort of dive into the world of publishing and self-publishing, and anyone who's ever done that knows that it is a bit of a quagmire. It's not the easiest thing to get through, and it was a learning experience for sure.
We have it at the library, Sarah.
Thank you.
If anyone would like to ask any questions, please feel free to unmute.
I have a question. So the pictures that you just showed us tonight, are those all the pictures from the project, or just a subset of them?
No, it's just
hard. Yeah, it must have been really hard to kind of filter out some of those pictures to pick your favorite ones, you know?
Yeah, I can't remember how many photographs. I think I might have photographed 15, maybe 11 or 15 people. There's more on my website than there are in the book, just because by the time it all kind of, COVID kind of put a big dent in things, because I had planned on continuing the project after the first book, and then putting the photographs that I'd taken after the book was published in the next version of the book. And then it just sort of kind of slowed everything, came to a screeching halt, and didn't get a chance to do that. But there are more photos on my website, and that you can check those out. And there's a stories as well listed with them.
We have a couple of questions in chat for you, Jason, as well.
Oh, sure.
One of them from Barb. I tried to order the book on Amazon, but it was sold out. Is there anywhere else I can buy it?
Yeah, you can buy it directly through my website, and it is printed on demand, so it shouldn't be sold out. But I know that you can buy it through my website. So if you go to jasonpaigesmith.com, then you can follow the links through the Old Estate Project and the books available through there. So, and if you have any trouble, feel free to just text me, email me, or call, whatever works best for you. We can do that.
And there's another question. Is there any reason for choosing still photos versus action shots, or an action shot type of photo or video?
Yeah, I mean, I I started out as a photojournalist, so I've covered a lot of different sports and a lot of different things in action photos. But for me, the still photo and a portrait, it just has a way of sort of kind of settling things. It brings people. I think it's a better way for people to make a connection with somebody else through a photo. I think you can learn a lot about somebody by just looking at a portrait that's a very intentional portrait that you make of someone, rather than photos of somebody doing something. That certainly has its place, but for me, from my perspective, trying to get to know somebody and trying to tell their story, I feel like the still photo and the portrait has much more impact than maybe say somebody doing something or video. So that's just my perspective. I've always been a really big fan of the still portrait.
I don't see any other questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? If you'd like to unmute, feel free.
I have one more.
Sure.
I imagine that you do digital photography, is that right?
I do, yeah.
And you've probably been doing it for a while. I'm curious if you must have started out not digital, and what the transition was like for you.
Yeah, I transitioned. I started out on film very early. It was film, and then I transitioned from that to digital. The digital switch wasn't too bad. It was in some ways it was kind of nice. Other ways it was frustrating. I remember when I switched to digital, one of the biggest frustrations was the cost involved, and the constant need to update and upgrade and get different cameras as people race to have more megapixels and better resolution and things. That's not as big of a deal these days, but back with film cameras, you could buy a film camera and be able to use that same camera for decades, which isn't really the case with digital cameras. They're more like computers, but you can still get a pretty long life out of most of them these days if you're taking care of them. But in some ways it was nice. It changes things a little bit in the way you see things with film. You know what you want to capture, you know what you think you're capturing. But anybody who's ever shot with film knows that when you get your film back, the pictures aren't always exactly what you thought they were going to be. Yeah. And so with digital, it is nice to know kind of where you're at as you go along. But if you're not where you want to be, then it's frustrating just as much, in real time as it would be if you were getting your film back. So.
Thank you.
No problem.
Jason, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. And I was curious about how and who made the decisions about how much of someone's story to tell. I noticed that some stories were very long, sort of full of details about many different stages, and other people just had very short paragraphs.
Yeah. That was me. I was the one who made those decisions, and a lot of times and that was another thing that changed as the project progressed. When I first started out, I was getting kind of small little sound bites of people's stories. I was getting a lot of information as I was talking to them, but I wasn't necessarily writing everything down at the time. I wasn't really thinking it through as much as I probably should have. And so that's one of the things that I'm definitely going to change as I go forward. But some people's stories seemed, I would focus on one aspect of the story. For example, the woman who loved to hike all the mountains. To me, the fact that she had this passion for hiking and the fact that she loved to do this in Acadia and Mount Desert Island, and she liked that kind of. To me, that was the draw for her photo. She had a much more interesting story outside of that as well. But for some reason I sort of gravitated towards that one aspect of her story. And so, it varied from person to person, and some people, especially people who had a lot of story, it also sometimes depended how much time they gave me as how much information they were willing to share. But if they have these really elaborate stories that they're from the military or from the past and things that they've done, it was really hard for me, even if they gave me a lot of information, it was really hard for me to whittle that down into a really short. I just felt like I wasn't doing their story justice if I cut it too short. So it was a little bit, either way, it was tough sometimes to figure out how much to share and how much to exclude. So
Yeah, I bet. I was just wondering, like, how often people were reluctant to tell stories, but would just tell, an aspect of their lives. But it sounds like it was a little bit of that, but a lot of just trying to extract what struck the essence for you. And so, thank you.
yeah, sure.
Great. I noticed somebody asked about the link, the access to the recording, and we definitely will have it on our YouTube channel within a couple of days. Joe usually edits them fairly quickly and then they're live. So you can always access it later if you want to take a look at the photos. And if you haven't visited Jason's website, you definitely need to see the hockey photos, which I think are so cool. There's a lot to look at, and it's just wonderful. And thank you for spending an evening with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, and so reach out to the library if you have any questions or concerns, or if you have ideas for future topics for talks. And thank you so much, Jason, and everyone for coming tonight.
No problem. Thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you.